and there's going to be more flux if you look at other areas. 1/3 of Michigan jobs are going to see 70% of their tasks change in the next 12 years or be automated. That's a lot, I think we can agree, 70% over 12 years. And that goes up to about 80% in production occupations. In manufacturing, it's about 65%. So these are very real things. Michigan, on the other hand, has been undergoing the automation changes for 20 years, 25 years, maybe more. So, putting it in perspective, I think these are substantial changes, but they're not going to create mass joblessness. I just want to suggest a couple more linkages from data we are developing to perhaps some outlines of how we might respond. Just a few things. Very broadly, it's pretty clear to say that occupations that involve interpersonal skills, higher order cognitive skills, thinking, creativity, and complexity are going to do better. Panel here will probably drill down on more of these in a minute, but let me add a couple things. Some things that are going to last and some things that are vulnerable. Our data show 24% of the tasks in occupations requiring a bachelor's degree are automatable, but 55% are in non-BA occupations. Management, business, financial, engineering, and computer occupations safer. And it's not just, you don't have to have a bachelor's degree. Many health support, community service, education, and public sector jobs only have moderate exposures, less than 40% over 12 years. So caring and community matter. Rote work, a bad place to be. Anything predictable, factory, offices, restaurants, hotels, are not going to be a good place to be. Disconcerting exposures of something like 70 to 80% over the next 12 years in those areas. For that reason, I'm worried about underrepresented communities, often working in food service or admin in offices. I'm worried about smaller communities where we see, in general, significantly higher figures. So a couple takeaways. College still helps. Tech, digital, engineering skill sets, helpful. Health, human welfare, caring, and community, gonna matter. Rote is bad. So I'm just gonna wrap up and say, I think the task before us is to teach the stuff that machines can't do. This is something that the MIT scholar Eric Brynjolfsson talked eloquently about. I really agree with this. What are the skills that are durable because a machine can't do them through calculation now or something we don't imagine in the future? I think there's a lot of space for that. I think, as Elon Musk says, humans are underrated, but we've got to get better at being humans. And that means some of the inherently social and complex aspects of human life are where we need to go. Communication, persuasion, coaching, we were just talking about that. Social perceptiveness, teamwork, entrepreneurship, project management. Those are fundamental things. So got to get better at the soft stuff, but I think that's going to be hard. That's just sort of perspective.
Great. So Carla, anytime you talk about automotive, you think about Michigan.
Yeah.
Bring this down to us and to the street level in Michigan. What's the future look like?
Yeah, well, it's never been more disruptive in automotive in general. Everything is changing, everything from the life cycle of the product to the use of the product to the customer expectation of the product and even to the purchasing side. So every part of the supply chain today is going to be disrupted from start to finish. And when you look at technology itself, every time we've had this kind of a revolution in our society, we have managed to find opportunities along with that revolution. So, when we think about what's going to happen in manufacturing, things are going to happen much faster, and things are going to start happening over the air. Updates, quality updates. Things that today take manpower will in the future take computer power. So looking at those changes, the best thing to do is to start thinking about how we can begin to train to evolve these changes and make them happen. And this isn't just, this isn't just the non-degreed jobs or the skilled trades. This is all the way through. Because even people today with a master's or a PhD in engineering, when we're moving so fast in technology, quickly you will become outdated if you do not adapt lifelong learning. I'm a huge advocate of lifelong learning. I don't care what skill you're in, what job you're in. It's so important to always stay on top of the changes. Constantly renew yourself and be ready to participate. We talk about machines doing work. Well, those machines need programming. Those machines need maintenance. Those machines need electricians, which we don't have enough of by far. All of these support skills are going to be needed, and we need to start finding ways to better educate and more quickly educate.
Yeah.
Today's four-year system, in most cases now 5 years, if not longer, it's too long. By the end of 4 years, already that technology has morphed into something else. So what are those certifications that we need to do to keep people relevant? And the automotive industry, when you think about, I've just been talking about the production of the vehicle and some of the brain power that needs to go into the vehicle, but you look at roadways and the infrastructure that's going to be required on the roadways for V2X to enable the right communications, to enable the right programming. All of that infrastructure along our freeways and in our cities has to be managed and developed and installed as well. So how to shift, the resources to go in that direction, how to make sure we have adequate funding. That's another big issue on the infrastructure side today. The current, I don't want to get too politicky, but the current way of getting money from fuel tax, it's essentially that's a budget cut year over year. It's just not working. But the amount of money that's going to be required to create that infrastructure is huge. So we really need to be thinking about different ways of funding, and cities and municipalities have to be thinking about how to invest so you can have a smart city. Because if you don't have a smart city, one that's using technology and data to really make the lives of the citizens better, you will also become, the ghost town of the future. So you really need to be thinking about that very holistically, because in the ecosystem of smart mobility, everything is connected.
Wow. So, Carla, let me first agree with you that as a father of 4, 5 years is too long. My pocketbook would agree with that as well. Dan, you're kind of in the middle of this discussion. There is a big gap right now in skills. You're dealing with multiple populations and trying to prepare them for today's work. Is today's system working for the jobs today? And if it is or isn't, how do we fix it to work for the jobs of tomorrow?
Well, it clearly is not working well enough for the jobs of today, right? I think we all would agree that there are skill gaps that we find, and there are workforce kind of pipeline challenges throughout the system, whether we're talking about folks with higher ed degrees or talking about folks who might enter lower skill or middle skill positions. Employers are having trouble filling those positions, throughout. And we share that problem at Goodwill. So for those of you that don't know Goodwill, we're a social enterprise, and we actually run 4 business lines in addition to our kind of mission focused, is that we're using those as job training opportunities for folks to then transition to competitive employment with all of you. And we have trouble filling the positions, right? So it's not working well. It's particularly not working well for certain populations. We all would agree that adult ed, for example, just needs a reboot probably throughout the state. That's something that, frankly, we ought to be thinking about as we think about not only fixing the problems of today, but figuring out how to prepare folks for the workforce of tomorrow. If change is the constant that we can expect for the rest of our lifetimes, and it is, we've got to actually help people, give people the tools to navigate those changes, whatever they are. And that begins with K-12, but that's got to continue into adulthood. So just 2 other quick thoughts really quickly about the current system. One is we get approached frequently by employers who have short-term needs, right? And so we're trying to balance this need for people now and the fact that we've got to start preparing the systems to help people for what's coming 10 years from now, 8 years from now, 12, 15 years from now. And frequently when the employers show up for us, it's way too late. You're showing up and you're saying, and I'm gonna say you, I don't know how many of you are employers in the room, but you show up and you're like, hey, I need someone tomorrow. I need 10 people tomorrow, right, with these skills. Like, that's not gonna work. Like, for obvious reasons, I hope, that doesn't work. And so what we need as a sector, I would argue, are much longer term partnerships between employers and workforce developers, whether that's community colleges or folks like Goodwill. The other thing that we think about is that the system of supports that's necessary for folks is not just around occupational training. And that's going to continue to be true in the future, maybe even more so in the future. So if you think about, and for those of you in the education world, you think about the fact that part of what is necessary to help students succeed is a lot of support outside of school, right? It's transportation, it's, you know, people are food insecure, you've got to deal with food, all that stuff. The same, like, they have parents, and those parents are struggling with the same issues, and that's what keeps them from holding jobs. And it's also part of what makes it challenging to train them for the next wave of jobs. So long-term partnerships are necessary, and these kind of greater out-of-work support services to help people retain jobs and make themselves available for training are necessary.
Great. So we're going to turn to questions in the audience after one more question here. So given the speed of automation, the lack of infrastructure investment, both physical and in workforce, are you shocked that employers aren't behaving differently and policymakers aren't behaving differently? It shocks me. I've two reactions as I look at this. There's a disconnect in the employer community that's profound because the workforce system has failed. So they're saying, why should I invest or partner in a system that never services me? I'll do better hiring off the street. And then take the public policy side of that. You've got the challenge, Carla, as you pointed out, that we can't cut ourselves into good infrastructure. So are you shocked that there's not more progressive activity either out of employers or the public sector?
What we keep seeing, quite frankly, and I'll speak for a little on this one, a lot of people are just trying the same things and expecting a different result. And a lot of people are going on their own. And I think when we're looking at this kind of a problem, it requires a triple helix approach. It requires government, industry, and academia to work together. And that means sometimes giving up some of that competition and independence that we see between businesses, between governments and municipalities, and actually beginning to work together to find that solution. It's not something that's going to be this business or that business. You really have to work together, form kind of a consortium, and begin to work with the academics to get the right kind of training, begin to work with the social systems and some of our nonprofits to, again, be able to come up with those solutions. It's not going to be easy. It's going to require funding from a variety of sources. And I think that's always the silver bullet, is really trying to find where this funding is coming from. Everybody's going to have to pitch in to make this work and for our communities to be successful.
Are we seeing examples of that anywhere in the country?
There are some examples in some cities, and I'll mention Columbus because I was there in academia for almost 3 years. And there is a consortium there, and that's why Columbus won the Smart City Challenge from the DOT to really provide ladders of opportunity through mobility for a lot of the underserved populations in the city. And it required a combination of not only government and the municipalities surrounding Columbus, all of the suburbs, but also there was a group there that is very strong. It's called the Columbus Partnership, which consists of all the major CEOs of all the big companies that are in the metropolitan area. And that group alone banded together at first to bring in about 90 million in matching funds to the 50 million that was given from DOT, but now that figure is up to $550 million. Wow. So, and that's coming from the public and private sector. So it can happen with the right kind of collaboration. And again, deciding on what those things are that you can collaborate and that you do care about and that are mutually successful to, you know, continuing to get the employment that you need, to be able to develop technology that you need, and then to allow the entire community to thrive.
I mean, I'd just say, I think these changes have a clock time that has been hitherto just a little bit too slow to create the kind of sense of emergency that is needed, I think. I think we're arriving at that now. The technology's going faster. Yeah. The economy the labor market is tighter than ever before. So I think we're at a stage of I think there's significant experimentation in many regions now, consortiums of business, local community college, interesting arrangement. I'm thinking also, and then states now become incredibly important. I'm thinking Iowa and Washington have now created significant lifelong learning accounts, provisions for matching employer match of employee deposits. We're beginning to see these kind of things, and we're also seeing interesting solutions, as in Indianapolis, creation of a sort of private sector oriented and organized training system to basically provide fulfillment to companies' very specific needs. So I think there's all kinds of experimentation. I think we need states to begin now helping to scale.
So Dan, are you seeing this at the street level yet? I mean, are you seeing this in Detroit where there's any inkling that we're going to start to get this kind of collaborative approach?
We are. Although it's really early and Lord knows we need a lot more of it. But the CEOs of Focus Hope and Goodwill and Sir Metro and JVS and United Way and Access have started getting together specifically to work on these kinds of issues. I know that there's a group of CEOs of for-profit companies that have gotten together and they're starting to think about and work on workforce development issues. And obviously philanthropy is doing their part. I think what's missing is that those groups are not necessarily working all in one room together. We've got 3 different circles, and we've got to figure out how to combine those 3 into one larger circle to work on some of this stuff. I'm sorry, I know you're moderating, but I've got a quick follow-up question.
Yeah, please.
So are you saying there are, this is great, right? Like, I'll get to
yeah, anybody can.
Right. That employers are setting up funds that allow employees to contribute to them with an employer match to pay for ongoing education?
But with the state structuring a provision, essentially like an IRA or a healthcare, where so it's a match of assuming that both the company and the worker have an interest in this, right? And you could see the employer is probably hesitant to fully support training that might go somewhere else, but has an interest in workers sticking around and upskilling. So this is Iowa and Michigan and Washington worth looking at, I think.
We're seeing a lot more co-ops and industry-supported research in academia, especially in the four-year universities. We're seeing it a little beginning in the community college, but we need a lot more at that level, a lot more collaboration between industry, sponsoring students, doing internships, apprenticeships.
Let's turn to audience questions. We want to get right to the discussion. George? Is there I think we have a microphone coming to you, George.
I'll hold it, sir. So a couple of comments. For people interested in this who've not yet ever seen the very short video called Humans Need Not Apply,
yeah,
I suggest everybody check that out. Yeah. Secondly,
it'll scare you.
It will. But what's even scarier is check out all the free research that futurist Amy Webb has made completely publicly available to understand the distinction between AI and ANI. What we all think of as AI is, it's our ABS braking system. That's ANI. That's artificial narrow intelligence. AI itself is a far scarier potential, and it kind of erases the claim that we might need electricians to fix the machines that we're inventing for today's mobility. Machines are already diagnosing and fixing other machines. Machines are actually teaching machines to do things that those machines were never initially designed to do. So the future is a little foggier, I think, than a lot of people understand. Doesn't necessarily have to be scary, although the unknown is always somewhat scary. But the question that it leads to is, I think, the one that Mark actually referenced in his opening comments. It's, if that's the case, if we can't even imagine 10 years from now what work is actually going to look like and mean, what is the right learning environment that we should provide? Trainings for dogs. We should nurture a love of lifelong learning for people. And that's a whole set of soft skills, some of which were mentioned: critical thinking, creativity, imagination. Oh my God, it's the liberal arts. Thanks.
What's your reaction to that?
I'll say I think that's a great comment. I agree with all aspects of it. I agree also with your attempt to return us to a modified freak out being useful at this period. I would add, I think we have more time. I think we should retain the degree of agitated fear to drive reform, but it's going to take longer than this. I think that the installation of technologies occurs far slower than it often looks like.
And I'm afraid our systems aren't adjusting fast enough to that issue. I keep coming back down to this notion that this is all wonderful when we talk about this, and it feels as I thought it would when as a kid, when they were talking about the future, would be, oh, isn't that wonderful? Yeah. Think big, but doggone it, we've got underserved populations right now that can't find work. Yeah. How do we make that adjustment?
Well, Humans Need Not Apply is a scary video, and everything that George said is correct. And I think the liberal arts education matters immensely. And we think about the liberal arts education, like we think about education that promotes creativity and imagination and so on and so forth as occurring kind of K-12 and then college, like higher ed. But it doesn't have to stop there. There's no reason we couldn't actually build. So I started off saying earlier that the adult ed system needs a reboot. We could build an adult ed system that actually incorporated liberal ed. And we don't think about adult ed as including liberal arts stuff at all, right? And it needs to include particular occupational skills training as well, because we've still got short-term needs to meet. But so building a system that does that, I think, is very doable, and we've just got to engage in the work of doing it. But the second thing I would say is, so you asked Dave a couple of questions ago whether we were surprised. I mean, I'll tell you, I'm not surprised at I'm a black man, right? So let's be clear, it'd be hard to surprise me anymore. So no, I'm not surprised. At the same time, tech is an enabler. It's not just a displacement tool, right? So we serve populations that live with developmental disabilities, with mental illness, with physical disabilities, and the truth is that technology, when harnessed for good, right? We can harness it for whatever we want. It's our tool at the moment, anyway. We could harness it for good. So you put augmented reality glasses on somebody who couldn't actually meet the quality standards, say, so you're producing a part, you're assembling a part, and you've got to produce, there are certain quality standards that you've got to meet, right? 90 of the 100 parts that you produce for purposes of this conversation have to be done correctly. Well, if you put glasses on somebody that gives them just-in-time instructions around assembling that tool, somebody who couldn't meet that 90 parts per 100 threshold, all of a sudden can. So, we have decisions to make about how we harness this tool to use. And I would argue that we can use it for human good. We don't just have to be scared by it.
Other questions? There's one there.
So I am a small business owner in Detroit. We specialize in historic window restoration called Building Hugger. We have a very specific training need, as you can imagine, and we've had a lot of trouble hiring from these training programs that train very broadly and sort of to an exam or to a, OSHA 30, lead training, things like that. But they do lack soft skills. They also lack actual hard skills as well. So I'm wondering, there's lots of small businesses that are very niche businesses. what's the discussion around supporting small businesses in their in-house training needs? Are there dollars available, and how can we access those dollars?
That's a great question.
So I was just talking with that consortium that I mentioned when we were just talking with Jim Jacobs the other day, who actually has done a lot of work, I think, with the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation. And one of the things that we did talk about was that small businesses have a much harder time accessing these systems, right? If GM shows up to Goodwill and says, hey, we're like, woo, let's go, right? And if you show up and say, hey, I need 2 people next week, well, call us when you're bigger. And we don't do that, but that's how it feels, right? What would be really interesting, and it's hard to train people, literally 2 people for that kind of one-off need, but a consortium of small businesses that showed up together and said, train to a basic standard, like we all agree we need this much, and then we'll take it from there. That could actually work for all of us, whether it's community colleges or Goodwills or Focus Hopes of the world. And so that's the approach that I would recommend taking, and we're happy to work with you to try and figure out what that might be. The other thing I would say is we've gotten into occupational training. We've actually been really good at the soft skills. I hate calling them soft skills because they really are the much harder to teach. People don't lose jobs typically because they don't have the hard skill. They lose the job because they're not a great teamwork, or they can't communicate well, they provide feedback really poorly, or they take feedback really. It's the soft skills that typically have people losing jobs, or the lack of support services. I have attendance issues because I've got transportation challenges and nobody's helping me with those. So we've built the occupational training on top of the soft skills, but I would agree, here's my point, it's easy in this kind of environment we're in right now where folks have really profound short-term needs to lose sight of the fact that the soft skills training has to happen first, or has to be built into this process. We can't just be about meeting the occupational training needs of the employers. We've got to actually make sure that folks are ready to work before they get the the occupational skills to do the job.
I agree with that. We may have overvalued hard, and we certainly have had hard skill challenges, but that has been the focus of the last 25 years. And I think this discussion is sort of pointing to the idea that hard skills may be more replaceable in some ways.
So my debatable and somewhat controversial assertion for years has been there's not a whole lot of separation between soft skills and liberal arts.
Yeah, yeah.
And we've not made that connection. But if you think about critical thinking, you think about the civility that has to be shown if someone's criticizing you, et cetera, that's coming out of that same kind of box. So, George, we're back to liberal arts. Carla, you had it.
Yeah, I was just going to add an AI. When you think about the coding that goes into AI and the machine learning, soft skills, you cannot even begin to think about how to code that properly. I mean, eventually there will be some, but every brain is different, right? And we don't even know enough about the brain to begin to program that properly. The other thing I wanted to add is beyond just training, I think small business owners could also collaborate on mobility solutions for people that can't get to work. I'm certain you can't afford, as a singular business owner, to be able to provide rides, Chariot, Via, whatever, ride-sharing services. But if you're in the same, geometric vicinity, you could think about collaborating. You could also think about collaborating for sourcing of basic materials and office supplies. If you join together, that's global sourcing, what most big businesses do. But working together in a community-based solution will always help.
Other questions?
This is for Doug Smith from Oakland Community College. This is probably for Mark, but anybody can comment on it. One of the most undiscussed issues of the problems we face in skilled trades is instructors. And is there anywhere where they're doing more with business and industry and not just try to deal with the second biggest problems business and industry have, which is retirees and getting them back in the classroom? And we've made some advances, I think, in the K-12 system with the leadership of the superintendent, the former superintendent, and Roger Curtis. But what about companies actually being able to build into a 35 or 40-year-old into their workday, teaching one class? Because we can't find instructors, whether you're K-12 at the tech centers or the community colleges, whether it's welding, machining, robotics, we can't find instructors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is one subset of the entire priority that's needed of greater earlier engagement by companies. I mean, as things move faster, one can't expect, the public sector and all of the intermediaries can't be expected to intuit where these technologies are going. Also, I think that the solution you suggest right there of actual company personnel engaging in the training, could be part of an entire incumbent worker retraining effort as well. Companies are going to need to be constantly turning their organizations into learning organizations. So that reduces the gap between the company and outside pipelines. So I think you sort of are answering your question there.
It's really, really vital, fundamentally, for companies to allow their employees to go and talk, and not just skilled trades, but also in the technical areas. We don't have enough students today that want to go into STEM careers. No. Young people, we need to be out in those elementary schools talking about the cool things happening in the automotive industry. It's extremely vital. And the other thing is, we are one of the few societies on earth that don't value our retirees and take that expert knowledge that exists, and we have a ton of it in this area, and bring it back both into companies to train the younger staff and into educational institutions to do that kind of training. We really need to value it and honor and respect it. And then I think you'll see more retirees wanting to do that.
That's a great point. In the back there.
Hi, I'm Melanie Piana. I'm with the City of Ferndale. And I just wanted to sort of back up what Doug Smith said. I have a nephew who I realized when he was a sophomore in high school that he was talented for the trades. But our family and everybody else had cultivated him to go to school. And I had to adjust my thinking as well as my family. And he wanted to do automotive track. And he went to his school district, school board, to advocate, don't close down my automotive classes. And they closed down the automotive classes because they couldn't hire a teacher that they could afford who had these certifications. So then he graduated high school and had no direction. And he took a gap year flipping or making pizzas at Little Caesars. And someone just found him, and he's now working for Walbridge in the trades. But it was no path through the school, and which helped him get there. And so he's now making enormous amount of money and doesn't have the life skills in order to budget or manage his newfound wealth of $28 an hour. And I think his story and our experience as a family navigating, and I'm pretty well connected, that I couldn't figure out how to help him, and that the system didn't help him at all.
There are definitely folks who fall through the cracks, and it's mentioned it before. There are all sorts of folks who we currently don't serve well, and we should be so as agitated as we are about the future of work, right? In part because I think we're probably self-concerned. We ought to be that agitated about the current state of work. And those who are not kind of coupled into it effectively, whether they're young people who are trying to figure out where they're going to go, or older folks who've retired from their primary job and are looking to get reintegrated into a different position, but we don't think about that.
So have we swung the pendulum too far into everybody needs a 4-year degree?
So I feel really strongly about this.
I feel very strongly about this.
Yeah, and we're probably going to disagree. I don't think so. But here's what I would say. So I was at there was a session yesterday on PostSecondary Opportunity. And I said this yesterday, and I'll say it again now. We do ourselves a disservice when we pit the post-secondary folks against the CTE folks, the career and technical ed folks. And we're on the cusp of doing it right now. And I want to say this this is critically important. Neither side wins fighting the other. Ultimately, what we need is more training of both kinds available for everybody. And there's a coalition that can be built there, right? More training for all. Al Pashoka came up with something yesterday, and I can't remember what it was. But whatever it was brilliant, that little slogan. And that's what we should be doing.
Yeah, my view is whatever a child's talents are, are those that should be reinforced. And those are the ones that should be supported and go forward. We often look at a child's report card and what do? We pick out the low grade and say, you got to fix this. But in essence, we should be looking at the high scores and saying, you should really work on this more because you're really good at it. So this idea that every child has to go to a four-year institution, we've already seen studies where the ROI on that is ridiculous. You know, spending thousands and thousands of dollars and then unable to get a job, or to get a job that even is within the skill set that they're good at. So I really think you need to hone in on the skills that people are good at. And if that skill is a skilled trade, working with your hands, again, that should be admired. It shouldn't be frowned upon.
Yep.
I just, from personal experience, my son was a hands-on kind of kid. He went to a four-year college, got a degree in ski area management from Northern Michigan because he liked to work outside and, you know, work with things on the slopes. Now he's decided after several years in that field, he's going to go back and become an apprenticeship and become an electrician. That's probably what he should have done from day one, but it was just in our head, you know, your kids have to go to a four-year college and get a degree. And again, I think we really should, you know, appreciate and allow children to do what they're good at and go for those careers that they love. And learn and continue to learn and keep up with technology.
Meanwhile, I would just throw in the technology is completely undercut and is undercutting the false distinction that Dan attacked here. I mean, liberal arts has got to move and is moving into much more experiential and even practical, you know, ways of teaching. You have like liberal arts companies, you know, liberal arts colleges bringing in launch code to do a coding, you know, knowing that they would do it. On the other hand, I think, you know, CTE has got to realize that a basic digital literacy is a starting point for everything too. So there are more rigorous aspects there that need to be brought to bear. So I think, like everything these technologies are blowing up distinctions and creating convergence of every type.
Yeah.
You said it.
So let's come back to this issue of, we doing CTE or are we doing four-year and pitting them against each other? Is that happening because we've created a culture of scarcity? We can't fund both. We have to argue one over the other. We're only going to put so many resources into educating. Is that where we've come as a society?
Well,
interesting. Yeah.
I don't even know how to tackle that.
Yeah. What do you think?
What if we flipped it on its head and behaved like a culture of abundance?
Right.
Especially in a state like Michigan that 100 years ago was Silicon Valley. What if we reallocated resources in a different way? Would we benefit? And Carla, let me turn to you on that. What's your wish list if we're going to tackle this issue of future workforce and how we fund and take care of education?
I look at societies where education is sort of working, and let's talk about Germany as a good example. And that is a society where the educational system it's okay. It's not great. But the reinforcement, again, comes from industry and apprenticeships, a lot of apprenticeships, a lot of university work with industry. The companies are sponsoring and actually putting money into the programs of all the different institutions. And that creates this continued revitalization of the workforce. So I continued to come back to, you know, we can't point fingers and say government needs to allocate more money and or academia needs to, you know, we can only raise tuition so much. And, you know, industry has a role to play, and we have to care about developing that workforce, and dollars have to come that way. It will create sustainability if sustainability is what we need.
Dan?
Gosh, so much to say. Maybe two thoughts. I'll try and crystallize it down to two things. One is So like there are horror stories on both sides of the equation when we think of, so there are kids who clearly are skilled trades inclined who get pushed toward college, and then there are folks who clearly could go to college and get pushed into skilled trades, right? And I'm seeing nods from people of color in the room in particular who have suffered this consequence for many, many years. And one of the things I don't like about the German education system, just to be clear, is that that program, like they start making decisions about the future of kids really early. And particular kids like in immigrant communities get steered into coursework and schools that are not designed, like don't get you a higher ed degree in Germany. So like the point is the pendulum can swing too far in either direction, and it is the kind of the tyranny of the or that we ought to be concerned about as we think about the future here, as opposed to working on kind of this beautiful and in the middle, where we can build a program that actually serves all people well and both needs effectively. Maybe it's one thought then.
So I want to wrap up with this question for you all. You've got a room full of employers and there's policymakers. What, look out 10 years and tell them what ought to change in their lives to make this work. Mark, let's start with you.
To make
us prepare to prepare my children to be effective in the workplace. What should they be doing right now?
So I think it is about inculcating and having the system signal that constant learning mindset. And I think the most important thing there would be to create something like funds that travel with people to consume training of all kinds throughout their life. So I think creating some kind of these accounts or something would be an important signal. I think there is of abundance of experimentation now. If you think of also some of the new private models, boot camps, the code schools, I think these are applicable models for other things. But we need to support people purchasing these kinds of services. So I think that a state could distinguish itself with a major program to de-link from individual providers and put the onus on, put the responsibility and the ability to buy services on people.
Great. Carla?
Yeah, I would think about what will your business look like first in 10 years? Thinking of the technology that's coming, how will your business evolve? And then thinking about that, what skills will you need versus what skills you have today, and how will you fill those skill gaps, or how will that merge? And 10 years is really too short. You need to be thinking even 30 years. But where are the skill gaps that you can see there? And you'll know if they're coming in 2, 5, 10 years. And then based on that, begin to look at how those skills can be filled and not try to do it alone, because you're not the only business that's going to be facing those skill shortages, but then work in collaboration to begin to hopefully have the programs, or start working with the community colleges or your local school districts or wherever that skill gap is existing. The interesting thing to me right now is the group of young people coming up are pretty technologically savvy. I mean, they've grown up with this stuff. They're used to it. Where they're lacking today is a lot of the social communication, team working, team building. So immediately I see that as a skill gap that needs to be fixed with any new people coming in today. And then how you can create the programs by working with the various institutions that exist to begin to fill those skill gaps.
Great. Dan?
4 thoughts. One is, I'll go back to long-term partnerships. And I think it's employers, philanthropy, public policymakers, nonprofits in the workforce development space. That's a tool that we can use to actually meet short-term needs as well as long-term needs, but we've got to be working together in order to do it. 2 is, I think we need to purposefully and deliberately think about the notion of harnessing technology for good, like as an enabler, not just a displacer around employment. We're thinking about this in the life sciences, right? People think like cloning, right? We think about this all the time in life sciences. The same is true in workforce here. Like tech can be good or it can be bad, and we get to control that. And right now we're acting like we don't get to control it, but we're the decision makers who get to decide that. So let's decide to use it for good and be really thoughtful about its rollout and regulating it as we go. Third is the soft skills piece. So again, whether we call it liberal arts or whatever, soft skills are the currency that is most valuable already and will continue to be most valuable and grow even more valuable, I'd argue. And then lastly, we've got to continue to think about support outside of the workplace, outside of school. Particularly in an economy like the one we have today, the person who's losing their job at your place of work because of 3 no calls, no shows, it's not that they don't want to work. Like there's something outside of work that's keeping them from coming. And we've all got to be a little more deliberate about making the investments necessary to help that person get to work, keep the job, so on and so forth. And the same is true whether they're working or in a workforce development program. There are barriers outside of the workplace that keep you from coming.
Right. So let me close with these comments, kind of summing up where we are today. Change is coming. You can be in front of it or you can be under the bus, whichever. But in the meantime, we have total populations of people unready for that change. That is employers and policymakers. We have a chance to prepare in a new way. And we've got to think about this from a standpoint of those least served to those that have bad jobs for years that are going to disappear very quickly. And we have systems that don't work and are disconnected, and we have infrastructure we've not invested in. Other than that, it's a perfect system. So we have lots and lots of work to do, and the task in front of us is going to be monumental. But we can't do it, as Carla was saying, without pulling these groups together in a very collaborative sense. So I'm reading we actually have 9 more minutes after the clock went to 0. So let's check and see if there's some other comments, and then I'll just close and say the same things again. Lee?
Thank you, Dave. I just want to say that I think the amazing piece that is taking place is the career fairs, right? The exploration, right? Being able to showcase these students of what all the business and industry does, with professional trades. And then we talked about, you look at the career quest at 9,100 students in one day. That's pretty amazing exposure, right? Showing the amazing technology, all the good things that are happening. Michigan Construction Career Days, you look at the Detroit Construction Science Expo, right? 8 years running, pretty amazing. You talk about the step-up programs, the Detroit Workforce of the Future, that's just due this year. Pretty amazing, right? So you're stepping them up into these opportunities in a registered apprenticeship. But the biggest thing about it is, I feel, is that we got to continue to showcase what we do, right? The employers are there, the equipment's there. When you look at robotics and you're able to take, and we trade joysticks, and we hand them an autonomous demo machine or a robotic crane, their smiles couldn't get any wider, right? So then we're engaging that technology with them. We're showcasing the GPS with the heavy equipment and all the things that are taking place out there. But the biggest part about it is having the opportunity in the 12th and 11th grade, as we know, of being able to be in with these employers, right? Being able to see every day what's taking place. And I know there's a lot of good examples going on, but just more of that. So our partnerships with Detroit Workforce of the Future, DESC, just around the whole state. There's been a lot of great discussions, but when we do the family night, the parent night at career fairs, right? The parents are leaning in nice and close and everything, and we're sitting there. And they're wondering, they're hearing the benefits, and then they start leaning in closer and closer about the professional trades and the other areas. But the biggest thing about it is, Carla, you mentioned it. It's about what excites the student. What do they want to do? And the only way they can figure that out, what grade we're at now? We're at 3rd grade for career fairs now.
Yep.
Pretty amazing, right? So you get them that exposure early, but the nice part is that when you can talk to the parents and you get a registered apprenticeship and you look at that opportunity and they got a 3, 4-year, 5-year degree, they go trade that into 28 of the community colleges, put it on the desk, half the associate's degree. Pretty amazing. So the parents are like, wow, degree and a half? No debt, $70,000 of scholarship funding opportunity. It's pretty amazing. It's a good start, right? So I just wanted to share that, but there are some amazing examples that are out there that are getting off the ground.
Lee is with the operating engineers, so which just really opens a very interesting question. Are we seeing a shift in the union corporate relationships around this issue of workforce?
I think yes, definitely yes, because everyone is feeling this burden, regardless where they are. And then, you know, to capitalize on what you just said, make videos of that cool stuff, because today's youngster, they're not looking at commercials, they're not looking at newspapers or magazines, you know, they're watching Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, not even Facebook anymore. So make this cool, sexy stuff in industry happening out there to, you know, that can more than compete with what they're seeing on being bombarded with on a daily basis, because, you know, industry is pretty darn cool.
I got in one of the simulators, the operating engineers thing, and they suggested I go get a 4-year degree. Screwed up. Rose, we have another question up here.
Well, it's really just a statement, and thank you for saying that. You know, I think part of it is that, thank you. I think part of it is the way we talk. We say, not everyone's college material. Right. Hey, not everyone's skilled trades material.
Right.
And not everyone is. And those same skill sets that you use to build a house, those are liberal arts skills. Mm-hmm. They're just applied. So I think we have to think about the way we say, we're the ones who make that separation. So.
Right, that's an excellent point. Mm-hmm. Time for other question.
Yeah, my name is Ron Stefanski, and I work for a social purpose organization that does education with corporations. I'm going to go to Dan's exaltation of the and. I think you're right that in terms of corporations getting innovative, I was working over the past 5 years with McDonald's, which had all these people, 45% of whom didn't have a high school diploma. 20% of their general managers in their stores didn't have a high school diploma. Imagine that being in a McDonald's restaurant. The person running it doesn't even have a high school diploma. So they looked at it and they recognized they were spending $170 million on wages to people while they were training them. 90 days afterwards, 40% of those people had left. What McDonald's ultimately learned, the lesson learned was, we are paying for this. All we have to do is reallocate that money in a different way. And I think, Dan, to your point, is we bring employers into the discussion about education on a lifelong basis. We just simply have to look innovatively at how we're spending now, because they recognize with 130% turnover, they were paying the cost of this, and they've just moved the money now.
Mm-hmm. In fact, really quickly, just to add to that, at this session yesterday on PostSecondary Opportunity, there was a woman from Tennessee who came in from the Higher Education Consortium, something like that, from Tennessee. But anyway, her point was they had studied Tennessee employers. No, it wasn't Tennessee. They'd studied employers nationally, and like Discover and one other, I don't remember who it was, their return on investment around investing in their employees' education was like 200%. I mean, it was something insane, the ROI. From an employer basis. So when I say we need to reboot adult ed, what does it look like to actually have our adult ed instructors go to employer workplaces and train folks, right? Like you could deliver whatever at the employer work site after hours. The employer might be willing to pay for some portion of it. And that's thinking differently about what our adult ed system needs to look like. So I think it's a great point, Ron.
Great. Other question. We have time for one more.
Hey, Dave.
Oh, hey, John.
John Austin. I just want to offer, I think we have this distinction, college versus CT, in part because it is a relic of a education system built for the factory economy that we had quite a hand in. We had a college path for the professionals, the managers, the doctors, the educators, and we had a vocational path for everybody who would learn a trade and work at it their whole life. That we have to blow up that conceptualization. We have to reconceive our education system. You know, Peter Drucker described it first. Everybody needs the generalizable skills, the critical skills, and they need to be able to specialize and re-specialize forever and ever. And that means a higher level of formal education for everyone in a million different avenues. And that's a very different paradigm, but we got to make it real, or we're not going to create the future like we should.
Mark, anybody making it real in the country that you're seeing? It's doing a true, not just the project here or there, but a group that's a state or region that is completely retooled into that space.
I think Colorado is really making big commitments here. You know, I would say Michigan, I think, was early on an apprenticeship, but I think meanwhile has been overtaken by other actors like Colorado. I think they're committing to creating 27,000, a large number of apprenticeships in the next 8 years. And I think they're trying to show that it is a model that can move all across all kinds of occupations. So I think they have a whole realm, a variety of things they're doing at the higher ed, and in creating pathways throughout. So I think that's a state to look at. And I think you're right that historically there was lip service paid to the idea of the need for constant learning, but it really wasn't true until the last 25 years. So we have a system that really is not set to provide that.
All right, we're going to try to close again since I now can see that the clock is right. So you have 20 seconds. One piece of advice for people in the audience to do something to fix this. What do you tell them to do? Dan, start with you this time.
One piece, I'm going to go with the long-term partnerships, the same thing that Carla was saying. Get, employers, schools, philanthropy, nonprofits, policymakers, all got to get in the same room and work on stuff that we can agree on, and there's plenty.
Great. Carla?
Yeah, triple helix, triple helix, triple helix.
Mark?
Every individual indulge their curiosity much more.
Great. I'll add this. This is so complex, so many entry points, so many things to deal with. It's up to all of us to lead. So please leave today and lead in this space of trying to prepare for the future while getting people employed in the skills gaps today. Help me thank the panel.